Morning, Jezreel.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Is my audio okay?
Morning, Abby. So you're not going to let me see you today, Jezreel? There you go. All right. If you're muted, it's on your end, not on my end. My end says,
Is it good?
you're there.
Perfect.
Hey, Abby. Hello, Abby.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. So you two are my two favorite people in the whole world because I have a class of 45 students and you are the only two that are on this Zoom call right now. So think of yourselves as just having won yourselves an A+++++ with, you know, cherries on top, whatever. I have no idea how to find a time that would, a date and time that would work for most people. And I appreciate that part of it is if you don't have to do it, why should I do it? You know, it's not mandatory. I can't be penalized for not doing it. But I would hope that in a class of 45, there'd be a couple of people who either would want to just suck up and get online or who would actually have some interest in what might happen, but who knows? So I'm going to assume that we might catch one or two other people. So I want to begin by thanking you two for being on the call. I have no idea why that is. Maybe you were supposed to meet with your drug dealer this morning and he canceled on you, so you had free time. I don't know what, you know, was going on, but I appreciate it. I'm recording it, and therefore I want to go over some housekeeping things that other people who might see the recording later could find as reminders. So I'm going to tick off a list, but let me start with you two guys. Jezreel, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, you're good.
Good. When I last looked, which was 2 days ago, you seem to have on Blackboard about 1,000 points, which means that you're in the game in terms of being up to date without looking at each individual thing you might have done. So you're there, but you're not, you could have as many as 1,500 points at this point by my calculation in rough numbers.
I just finished the 2 assignments today.
Good. All right.
So.
And let's see, Abby. Oh, Abby, you're good. You had at least 1,200 points, maybe more. So,
Yeah.
you know, I did not see when I looked, and again, I'm going to emphasize this was a couple of days ago. I did not see an assignment 2 from you, Ab, nor did I see one from you, Jezreel. And I know I extended the deadline and all of that. So if there's something there, I haven't seen it yet. So that's that. All right, housekeeping. Number 1, and this is for the people who are not on the call, attendance at Zoom meetings, participation in Zoom meetings is not mandatory. I can't make it mandatory. So my hope is that people will realize over time that if we do this once every week or 2, there will be some value added and it might be worthwhile, or just, you know, for suck up purposes. And I appreciate suck up purposes too. So, you know, I showed up, Mike, you know, you promised me an A+++ with, you know, cherries on top. So where is it? Let me see. Do I have a syllabus acknowledgement from you, Jezreel? I do not. You know what that is?
The one where you write it down?
No, the one where you just say, I got the syllabus. Did you send me that?
I remember doing it. I might not.
All right, here's what I'm going to do. I will send out a recap memo about this meeting. I'll put the little, you know, paragraph in there. So if you haven't done it, just send it to me.
All right.
Abby, among many other things, you did that. So, you know, you are now the poster child for how to go through business law 1. Again, for people not on the call, things I put in emails, I typically put on Blackboard as an announcement as well as a message. So you can usually find it there. Papers, things that you send to me. Please put your name, the name of the course, which is BUA 205-101 or Business Law 1, the date, and what the assignment is. Assignment 2, reparations or something. Because when I get attachments in particular, but even the things that you post on Blackboard, it becomes, I guess, a little bit of an organizational challenge to keep it all where it's supposed to be on my end. So I'm asking you to label it so that I can do that. Everybody who took the welcome quiz, the one about, George Washington and Columbus and all that, everybody who took it got 100. Whether you had good answers, bad answers, indifferent answers, because the purpose was not to test you literally on whether you could name the 9 justices and all that other stuff. It was to provoke you to think about how you know what you know. Why do people think that Columbus discovered America? So I don't really care that you realize there were 7 people who had the title of president before George Washington. It's just, if you were an old person and you went to things called cocktail parties, that would be called cocktail party conversation. So it's not for the fact of the matter. Most of that wasn't for the fact of the matter. It was just to provoke you to think about it and to do 2 things. Number 1, question why you believe what you believe, which is a big step in life if you can do that. So the question in this class is always why? Why do we have this law? Why did the president do this? Why did the Supreme Court do that? The other thing is to appreciate that in addition to knowing why you think something, don't ever take anybody's word for it. So I get on here and I tell you that George Washington wasn't the first president. We can hope that I'm not trying to deceive you. We can hope that I know what I'm talking about, but maybe I don't. Maybe I just hacked into this meeting and I'm some, academic fraud from somewhere. So don't always, I think what I'm trying to say is be respectful to the people and the sources that are trying to offer you information, but don't assume it's true. Certainly don't assume that when I say it, it's true. And if you could demonstrate that it's not, that would be terrific. But especially in a course about law, the whole concept of, in a respectful way, challenging what you don't think is right is an important concept. It's the whole concept on which litigation is built. It's the whole concept on which rules are built. So Jezreel and I have a contract, and he says, I violated it. If he says that, he has to prove it. And I have to try to meet his allegations with some kind of responsive proof, okay? It's an adversarial system. Abby says Roe v. Wade was a sucko decision. Okay, now Abby is, before the Supreme Court, and she is arguing that. Why? It's not opinion. It's what you can marshal in terms of the support for whatever your position is. To do that, you got to understand the other side. If you don't understand the other side, you're going to fail. So I guess my point in the broadest extreme is to, number 1, have an open mind, and number 2, know what you're talking about. All right. Next point. If anybody wants to, and again, I'm saying this mostly for the people who are not on this call, wants to have a personal Zoom meeting to discuss anything, academic progress, a particular paper, whatever. That happened this week when somebody had questions about the assignment, the Reparations Commission assignment. And it resulted in not only my responding to that person, but to, extending the deadline and trying to be a little bit more. I wanted you guys to figure it out for yourselves. So reparations, ADOS, what's that? I don't want to tell you what it is. You're smart. Go find out. All right. where do you go to find out? If you want to find out about Hitler, I suggest you not go to a website that is titled Hitler was the greatest guy ever.com. You might want to look there, but you might want to look somewhere else where you hopefully would be accessing some more objective reality. So in my mind, you had to go figure out what ADOS was. And then you had to conceive how the government, if it chose to, would respond to paying reparations to people who were able to show that they were ADOS, American descendants of slaves, of slavery. Apparently for some people in this class, that was a little too, my expectations were too broad. And you guys haven't done the paper. I have no idea whether you're anywhere, involved in getting close to doing it. I think I've made the deadline to Monday.
Monday noon.
Yeah, Monday at noon. So if you have questions about the paper, let's deal with them now. You're here, I'm happy to answer them. So if either of you have questions, tell me, and I will do my best to make this a valuable call so that you will have like the perfect paper.
I was more having trouble with the fact of like finding the information about it and what's 4 pages worth of all that. That makes sense.
Yeah, but don't focus on the pages. Come on, guys. That sounds like, we're in middle school or something. I said 4 pages because I didn't want you to think it had to be a master's thesis. So what I would do if I were doing this paper, okay, ADOS, what the hell is that? American Descendants of Slavery. You look that up, go Google it. You're going to find a lot of stuff. But basically, it's a concept that says that people who are descended from slaves, going back as far as 1619 in this country, are in a socioeconomically disadvantaged position because of their heritage. They have fewer educational opportunities. They have had opportunities to accumulate less wealth. They provided trillions of dollars worth of free labor along the way. Their ancestors did. And people, basically, a bunch of white landowners got rich and all of their descendants. So let's say that somewhere back in my line of, ancestors, there was a slaveholder and he or she made a bunch of money. The idea is that now, even now, although I don't know it, and we'll presume that I'm not currently acting in a racist way, that I would have the advantage over all those years. So whatever I have, my palatial McMansion home, my 47 cars, whatever, is a result of the inequities that were foisted on slaves. And the flip side being equally true, that if you, Jezreel, were the descendant of an American descendant of a slave, that wherever you are, however well you're doing, you would have been doing better had you not had your, I guess, lineage stunted by virtue of having been slaves. So back as far as 1988, there's been a resolution introduced in Congress every year saying we ought to have a commission to look at this. That's the bullshit thing that, elected people in legislative bodies do. Oh, we'll have a commission and study it. Okay, that's kind of the least you can do. And we can always ignore that commission report when it comes out 2 years later, so on and so on. That has never passed. The biggest stumbling block doesn't seem to be that the idea of compensating people for actual harm is bad. It's like there was so much frigging harm. And the estimates, if you go online and look at different academic articles that have focused on this, it's in the trillions of dollars. Sometimes it's in the huge trillions of dollars. Sometimes it's something more manageable, like, 17, 20, 25 trillion dollars. Well, that's more than the national debt at the moment, just to put it in perspective. So the idea, which is usually not articulated, is, yeah, I guess we ought to do something like that, or we could consider it, but where are we going to get the money? It's just impossible. So let's not open a can of worms and have somebody say we should do it. And then what do we got to do? We have to like mortgage the country to make these reparations payments. So I'm oversimplifying, but that's part of the background. So why would we make reparations at all? In this class, and I don't know how far you guys have gotten in terms of the chapters you've read, basic concept is if I hurt you without reason, you have the right to have me to be made whole by me. I hit your car, Ab, and you have $5,000 worth of damages and you are injured but not killed. You have the right to say it was my fault. You have to prove it, but to say it was my fault, and therefore I should be responsible for your car repairs and I should be responsible for your medical bills. Beyond that, you can also say I should be responsible for the pain and suffering, somewhat less tangible. So you broke your arm and it cost you, $17,000 in medical bills to get it fixed and go through rehab. That is easily provable. But the fact that you really don't have full extension of that arm and, it cut short your career as an NFL quarterback and blah, 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 those things become a little bit more speculative, but you have the right to be made whole because I don't have the right to enter into your life and hurt you. You have the right to be safe and secure from anybody doing something that hurts you. Now, if you threatened me and I hurt you in trying to protect myself, an entirely different proposition. But I hit your car, I was at fault, you get the damages. So take that and apply it to slaves. You guys came to Africa and not you guys, but your ancestors came to Africa and were involved in the so-called, slave triangle. You brought 6 or 7 million of us to this country. You kidnapped us. You put us in chains. You forced us to work. You didn't pay us. And along the way, you treated us like shit. So that's not a good thing. We deserve to be compensated. And if we could apply today's standards to that behavior back then, you could go to court and say, I got kidnapped. I've been held and forced to do this work, and you would win. And you would get money. And the money would be based on the harm to you in the case that I hypothesized with Abby's car and Abby's arm, but you would also get money to compensate you for all of the, I was going to say indignities, that's too mild a word, for all the bad shit that happened to you, okay? And now we are, fast forward a couple of centuries, and the question becomes, okay, does the idea of compensating people for the harm that was done to them, does that go away? So, Jezreel, you were my putative descendant of a slave. So the fact that your great-great-grandfather is dead, does that mean there's no longer somebody to be compensated and you don't get it just because you happen to be in his bloodline, X number of generations later? Well, we have another concept in the law, which is called wrongful death. So if in that car accident, Abby had died because of my negligence and creating the circumstances of that accident, Abby's family, let's assume that you are married, Ab. You look too young to be married, but let's assume you are. Your family, your parents, and your spouse could all go to court and say, not only do we deserve to be compensated for the damages to Abby's car and the bills that we had to pay before she died, but that was a wrongful death. So we've been deprived. I'll pretend you're 19 years old, Ab. I don't know how old you are. So she had another, 50, 60, 70 years to live. She was on a path to, become a famous neurosurgeon. She was going to earn X amount of money. So her financial future was wiped out. In addition to that, her husband could say, and, we were planning on having a family. We never had the chance to have kids. There's even a concept in the law, and don't laugh here, called loss of consortium, meaning that Abby's spouse could say, so I was no longer able to enjoy a life of physical intimacy with my wife, sex, okay? You can get compensated for the loss of all that, which seems legitimate if you think about it. So a whole lot of things happened to the people who were around Abby because of my negligence in hitting her car and killing her. So apply that and then say, if Abby's spouse or family could sue and win for that, why can't somebody who was a couple generations removed from the actual physical harm that was done to Jezreel's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, why can't he be compensated for that? And the reality is, I mean, there are lots of arguments about this, but the reality is, legally, there's no reason why he shouldn't be compensated. The mere fact that it's down the road. Now, think about other arguments. So if Jezreel can prove, number one, that his ancestors were kidnapped and held as slaves, which is tough. How's he, you know, it wasn't like slaves are sitting around at their own courthouse keeping a bunch of records about who they were, you know, and some slave owners kept records so that, you know, they just put down the first name of a person or whatever. So there's that whole thing of how do you prove? Because what you don't want to do is create a situation where everybody says, well, you know, I'm a descendant. Look, I appear to be an old white guy. Hey, I'm a descendant of a slave. I'm, you know, 1/16, you know, African-American and blah, blah, blah. So you got to prove that you deserve. In the case of Abby and the car accident, the police would have investigated. It's all contemporary. Her family, her spouse would have had no problem in proving that something happened. So there's the first part. The second part is, and I will use like my family experience here. So my ancestors came from Germany. They came at the turn of the last century, around 1900. So they weren't here when all these bad things were happening. And they could make an argument, well, whatever those badass white plantation owners were doing, it wasn't us. When we came here, we got, you know, shit kicked in our faces too. Not to the same extent, we weren't kidnapped, but, you know, life wasn't, you know, the proverbial bowl of cherries for us either. But why are you telling us that we should pay for stuff that we had nothing to do? All those bad things happened, but we weren't doing them. We had our own, you know, lesser glob of bad stuff happening to us. I don't know what history classes you guys have had, but, you know, like when they had the massive Irish immigration, you know, signs in windows, no Irish need apply. I mean, most of the immigrant groups that have come into this country have been discriminated against. Most of them have not been kidnapped and brought here. Most of them have not been forced into servile labor, put in chains, you know, had their families sold out from under them and all the other stuff. So I'm not trying to say it's comparable, but we don't have a good history of, you know, dealing with immigrants in this country. And most countries don't have a good history of dealing with immigrants. Immigrants, we can't call slaves immigrants. They were just people who were kidnapped. That was just, you know, a crime. So who is a descendant of a slave? And who has to pay? Does the whole country pay? Does this become a situation where the government says, that was bad, and we got to find out a way? So this paper is built on this concept that the Congress says we should pay reparations. We don't have the time or the expertise, this is the Congress people speaking, to figure this out. Just like we don't have the time or the expertise to run the air traffic system in this country, so we create the Federal Aviation Administration to do that. We don't have the time or expertise to run the whole concept of environmental protection, so we create the EPA. We don't have time to run the radio and TV industry, so we create the Federal Communications Commission. So we're creating something, call it whatever you want, and I've gotten some papers with some fairly clever names for what it is, but it's an administrative agency. What I need you guys to understand is that this happens all the time. So Congress makes a law saying we should do this, and it makes another law saying we're not going to do it. We're going to basically hire or designate a bunch of people to figure this out. That's their full-time job. We're over here worried about going to fundraisers and who's going to be president and blah, blah, blah. And that's, at least theoretically, a legitimate use of the Congress's legislative power. So they passed the buck, in a sense, to a group of people that are government employees, and they say, oh, you figure it out. So now that's you. How do you want to figure that out? You have to figure out what questions to ask. Who gets the money? Or who gets reparations? What form do the reparations take? Okay, well, we can't afford to give everybody X. So here's what we'll do. We'll give education credits. So that's not real money. That just says that Jezreel can go to Harvard on the government's dime, not on his dime, okay? Are there other things? Could we give him tax credits? So over the course of his life, Jezreel will be filing tax returns, and he will owe, you know, the $750 that Trump paid in taxes, maybe even a little bit more. So we'll give him a credit against that. So there's some effort to look at something other than a cash payment. When I kill Abby and I mess up her car, when her family and her spouse win, they get money, or they get the right to get the money from me. If I'm bankrupt or something, you know, they're kind of SOL, but that's the gist. So how are we going to do this? And are there ways to make amends if you can figure out to whom or for whom the amends should be made? And that's kind of it. So my hope was that you guys would figure that out and you would write about it. I don't care how you figure it out or, you know, what you propose. For me, it's always, did the person writing this paper understand what the issues are? I couldn't give a damn if you and I agree about how to do it, as long as you have a reasonable explanation for what you want to do. If we're talking about abortion, I don't care what your position is. I mean, I care, but I don't need it to be my position. I just need your position to be one that you can defend, as opposed to saying, well, you know, my grandmother always told me that abortion was, you know, a sin. Okay, I get it. And I want you to love your grandmother, but that's not something we can take to court. We can take to court the concept that life begins at conception. And if that's how you believe it, and you believe that taking a life is wrong, then you have a fine legal, you know, starting point for saying abortion should be outlawed. So I don't know, was any of that helpful? Did that put you on a path to doing a better paper? Don't worry about it. If you can do it in 2 pages, do it in 2 pages, Jezreel. Remember, guys, I'm sure people have told you this before, it's easy to write long. I tell you, well, I want 2,000 words. And you two guys, oh shit, 2,000 words, man, it's gonna take me forever. And this sucks, and I'm dropping the course and whatever. And I say 200 words, and you say, oh, that's a piece of cake. To do anything well and to do it short is much harder, requires more thought and more organization than it does just to have diarrhea of the keyboard in. Oh, let me plagiarize some more stuff and stick it in here and it'll look good and, you know, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so whether or not that, don't tell me it didn't help, because I just, you know, carried on for so long that I don't want to think that it was not helpful. But is there, do you have any other questions about the paper?
Nah, I'm good.
Ab?
Oh, no, I'm okay, thank you.
All right. What else in terms of housekeeping? I think that's it. So you guys were nice enough to be on the call, therefore I'm going to make it shorter than I intended to. I was going to go over some things with people, and that's not that I want to deprive you of, you know, the great wisdom that resides in my old gray head, but in future Zoom meetings, and I hope I haven't dissuaded you from participating. If we were having a class today, a real face-to-face class, I'd be talking to you about what you think about the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett and the controversy surrounding that nomination. I don't care, I would hope that you would understand that she is considered to be a conservative, originalist, textualist. But the question is, would you know what that meant? So, and we discussed that. And in a nutshell, what it means is that she is committed to making decisions based on what it is reasonable to assume the people who drafted the Constitution were trying to do, as opposed to looking at the evolution of cultural change. Example, nobody who drafted the Constitution had same-sex marriage in mind, all right? But over time, we as a country have come to believe that if two guys, two women, whatever, want to be married, we're good with that. I'm not saying that's wrong. What I'm saying is somebody like Barrett would probably say that wasn't what the framers of the Constitution had in mind. If you want to do that, have the Congress do that. Have the Congress make a law. That's what they're there for. It's not up to us to make us meaning the Supreme Court, to make new laws about stuff like this. So it's perfectly consistent with saying it's fine. It's where we are as a country. It's how our thinking has evolved. But to also say it's not up to judges to do that. It's up to judges. If the Congress passed a law and somebody challenged it and said, that's unconstitutional, same-sex marriage was not, anticipated by the founders, the judges could say, but their concepts of individual freedom and privacy and so on are consistent with that. Therefore, if the Congress wants to change the law, that's not unconstitutional. If that's too subtle in terms of judicial activism versus judicial restraint, then I just wasted your time. But so that's what we'd be talking about if we had a class. Other things. I'd want to talk to you about the debates, the presidential debate and the vice presidential debate. We could talk about the fly that landed on Pence's head, or we could talk about more substantive things. You didn't ask, but I thought the first debate was just an international embarrassment. I thought it was, I've seen the term shitstorm used to describe it. I don't know whether you guys watched it. I'm guessing you were exposed to at least some snippets from it if you didn't watch it. I'm guessing if there are 193 nations in the UN, that 192 foreign leaders were looking at it saying, holy shit, what is going on there? But that's just my opinion. I want you to understand that every day in the news, there are things that we could be discussing in this class. For example, you've heard of Google, you've heard of Oracle, right? You know that those are tech companies. You Google stuff every day. It's now a verb. I Googled, Jezreel to see whatever, see what his probation officer said about him in his most recent report or something. So they are fighting in court, and it's before the Supreme Court, and Oracle is saying that Google's Android operating system for its phones and whatever infringed on a patent that Oracle has for that kind of operating system. Now, the subtleties of that are way beyond me. You're probably a lot smarter than I am, so maybe you would understand the technology. But the idea that these two huge IT giants are in court discussing something that's going to have implications for, well, first of all, implications that are financial that will go into the billions of dollars. And that's happening today. Or that before the Supreme Court is a question about whether the census time period can be extended, and a lot of other things. It's just all there every day. And I don't want you to think that, we have this book and this book says there are 4 things you need to do to have a contract, and that's what business law is all about. No, those are the stepping stones to get you to a point where you can make decisions. Let me leave you with this, unless you have any questions. From 1954 to shortly after the turn of the century, I think it was 2002, the Supreme Court invalidated only 103 of more than 15,000 laws that have been passed by Congress. I think that is somewhere around 0.60 or 65% of all those laws. And an equally small percentage, an even lower percentage of the rules that were passed by regulatory bodies like the FCC or the Commission on Reparations for the Descendants of Slaves, and an even lower percentage of the laws that were passed by state legislatures. But the implications of those decisions have been huge. So it's not that a lot of laws get overturned, but when they do, if you guys had never come anywhere near a business law class, you would have heard of Roe v. Wade. You might not know exactly what it was, but you would know it had something to do with abortion. I would assume that as an intelligent young woman, Abby might have had more reason to think about what it was or to know what it was, but I don't want to, underestimate you, Jezreel, but it affects people. So somebody who is pregnant and doesn't want to be and is considering having an abortion is not thinking, oh, what did the Supreme Court say? But what options that person has have been determined by the Supreme Court 50 years ago. If Jezreel and I wanted to get married, it's not like, okay, we can just do it. At a certain point we couldn't, and now we could because the Supreme Court did something, okay? So for everyday life, in addition to business life, Oracle, Google, all that stuff, what courts do matters. So I'll leave it at that. Jezreel, any questions about anything?
Good.
Ab?
Oh, no, I'm good, thank you.
I'm really sorry about that car. I think they totaled it and you got a brand new, was it a Ferrari you got, or was it a Lamborghini, or what was it? Wow.
Oh, hopefully.
Well, tell your husband he doesn't get to drive it. All right. Thank you for taking the time out of your morning. I'm sure there were other things you wanted to do, including sleep in, but I appreciate you being here, and trust me, I will remember it when it comes time to stick those grades into WebAdvisor. All right, guys, have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Bye-bye.